Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you're tuning in. This is a post traveling to the ACC championship game episode of Tailgate Trashtalk, brought to you by Backyard Sports. Bentley, how are you feeling after a fine game that didn't necessarily come out the way we were kind of hoping it would?
Well, I did show up to the stadium proudly wearing my South Carolina hoodie that evening, and I walked out with 0 fights, 0 beers poured on me. So I feel pretty good about that. But my fingers are hurting a lot at the moment because I just finished typing out my 201-page manifesto on why I should be the North Carolina head coach. I'm not sure if it's gonna stand up to what Bill Belichick has submitted, but I'm gonna do my best.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's interesting that pairing, potentially Belichick and UNC, and it sounds like they are preparing to make the announcement. Like it's been made official, but still kind of crossing T's and dotting I's. So very, very interesting there. But yeah, let's jump into it, man. Championship week this past week. We open up Friday night with Boise State against UNLV. Boise does what Boise really kind of came to do, make that statement in the championship game. Ashton Jeanty did what he does on a weekly basis. He's such a mutant. And the crazy thing is, like, you can play really, really well against him all day, and then he just gets one crease and he makes guys miss and just destroys save a touchdown angles, right? Like you and I talked about it when he beat that DB from UNLV who had an angle, just not fast enough. For a guy that's that big and that fast, it's a challenge. It's a challenge on a weekly basis, and we've seen him really expose Mountain West defenses in a way that we haven't seen since, we talk Barry Sanders and guys like that. Like he's having a very close to, if not the best, right, season we've seen. He's been phenomenal, scoring touchdowns. It's the big plays that really catch your eye with him. But Boise makes a statement against a very good UNLV team. UNLV is no slouch, and Boise State really kind of put the screws to them in the Mountain West Championship game.
Yeah, they gave up that touchdown late to, I guess, late-ish in the fourth quarter to kind of choke away the shutout. But that was a game that was controlled from start to finish by the offensive line of Boise State and Ashton Jeanty. He said it himself this week. Somebody asked him kind of about his Heisman candidacy in comparison to Travis Hunter, and they're like, and he said it. He said, these teams, they come out and every single week their entire game plan is planned around stopping me, and they still can't do it. And when you have a guy who's playing with the extreme level of confidence that he is like that, and offensive line up front to be able to support the run game that they have, it's a scary thing to see coming, right? And I mean, you mentioned it. He just eliminates angles, right? He was streaking down the sideline, and I'm watching. I'm like, oh, that safety is going to get there, and the safety doesn't get there.
Nope.
It's like he's got 60 yards of green grass, or in this case, bluegrass, to cut off the angle, and it's like he's just not going to do it, man. Like, the kid is a freak. You call him a mutant. I totally agree. This is a team. Well, there's another team we'll talk about with a hot running back as well. But, like, this is a team that I don't care who you are in the playoff. You don't want to see them because you know that they can take all of the air out of the ball and stick it in the belly of number 2, and he's basically going to do whatever he wants for 48 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. Boise threw the ball pretty well Friday night too, which – if that's going to be the case, they're going to be even tougher to stop if they can threaten you at other levels. But Jeanty he threatens you everywhere on the field, no matter where you are, and no matter where Boise's got the ball, he can make a touchdown happen in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
Onward, upward, Tulane, Army, old faithful, old reliable Tulane, unable to get it done against that Army offensive attack. It just looked like all night that Tulane just didn't have an answer for what Army was doing offensively. Defensively, Army was able to get a couple of stops. We talked a lot all season, for Army to pull these upsets against these better teams because they were playing a bit of, kind of cupcake schedule early. They were going to have to score all the time. They didn't do it against Notre Dame, but they did do it here against Tulane. They scored on basically every possession. especially until the game really was kind of out of reach for Tulane. Another team that can just take the air out of the ball on you, and Tulane wasn't able to keep up in terms of being able to score offensively. Mistakes here and there, a couple penalties that put them behind the sticks as well that made them kind of desperate. But Army in their, this is a huge success of a season for an academy team. You go and win a conference championship, 1-loss season. Tremendous year for Army.
Yeah, Army had another one of these drives where they got the ball with 2 minutes to go in the third quarter, 16 plays, 84 yards, 11 minutes, and scored a touchdown. Yeah, and it's like, I get that the Tulane offense is really good, but when you're giving up 11-minute drives, like, you're just going to run out of game clock.
Yep.
And that's kind of what happened. I mean, they didn't get their offense going until they scored their first points with 44 seconds to go in the first half. And it's like 2 weeks in a row now they've come out and played with their food early, and it's come back around to bite them in the ass. And, it gets even worse for Tulane now that Darian Mensah gets in the transfer portal, and he's not going to be there next season. You and I talked all year long about him being kind of arrow up, like this redshirt freshman that's kind of light the world on fire potentially for the next 2 seasons. And now he's not in the building anymore. He's going to play for Manny Diaz at Duke, and they've kind of stumbled down late in the season, right? Like, I don't know. Excuse me. I'm not entirely sure who's going to show up for the bowl game for them. They get I just read this today. They get Florida. Yeah, they get Florida in their bowl game.
2-touchdown favorite Florida.
Yes, 2-touchdown favorite Florida. Like, that's not an easy opponent, right? It could be a sour ending to what looked like such a promising season most of the year for Tulane. They still had the best uniforms in all college football, but you mentioned it. They just really couldn't. They had no answer on defense for what Army threw out there on the field Friday night. Army was back to being peak efficiency, 2 for 2 passing for 17 yards out of the quarterback, but he did rush the ball for 25 carries and 100+ yards. So it's, the game goes to the over, but it's no thanks to Tulane this weekend. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Onward, Arizona State. You mentioned another hot running back. Holy shit, Cam Scatabo was the best player on the field this weekend for Arizona State. Just it was chug and then hit a big play. They really just kept chunking Iowa State in bad situations. Really keeping the sticks moving, keeping control of the ball. Iowa State, they played a fine game, but Arizona State proved to just have too much firepower for Iowa State.
Yeah, there was a point in the game, I believe it was in the first half, where it could have been one of those like sliding doors moments. It was one of the wildest plays of the game where they have like a pitch to Scatabo in the backfield, and he runs and it's like kind of bottled up, and then he runs back and reverses field. He's like 18 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and then he realizes like, oh shit, I can just throw this ball away. And so he goes to throw the ball away, and it kind of flutters in the air, and it's one of those no, and then it hits the ground, and you're like, yes, kind of moments there, and you gotta, yeah, for real. Like they cut to Dillingham on the sideline, and his face was like, oh my god. That was, I understand the game was an absolute blowout in Iowa State, despite having 2,000-yard receivers on their team, just really didn't have the dogs to play with Arizona State. Big Citrus, our boy, was not able to pull through for us on the defensive side of the ball. But if that play goes differently, if they bottle up Scatabo 20 yards back, maybe there's like a momentum swing and Iowa State maybe gets it rolling, The most impressive part of this victory for me is not what Cam Scatabo did, because he's been doing this for a while, is that Arizona State came out and did it without their number one receiver.
Yeah.
Right. They flashed the graphic up on the TV before the game started. I'll pull it up here. The reception difference between the number one and number two receiver on the team being Cam Scatabo, by the way, was 75 catches to 30. I think it was 35 going into the game.
Yeah.
Because he has 37 now. But like for them to come out and Sam Levitt being another redshirt freshman, commonality and theme here. For him to come out, and obviously Scatabo did what he did, but for Sam Levitt not to put them in bad positions in such a big time game, and for the coach to make kind of all the right decisions at the right times with that offense, and their defense playing very, very well, right? I mentioned the 2,000-yard receivers for Iowa State, but there was just an all-around ass kicking by Arizona State. You know, they kind of dominated from about middle of the first quarter on. It just wasn't a game, right? And when you have a guy who's running the ball like Scatabo does, that's a terrifying thing, similar to Ashton Genty. That's not a train you want to see coming down the tracks heading in your direction.
Yeah, I think if you're Iowa State and the way they play ball, you figure 19 points, you're going to be in this game late. They were not. Arizona State, 45 points. Xavier Guillory had a great game. Guy probably not even a lot of Arizona State fans knew before that game. Had a couple touchdowns. You mentioned it, missing their number one wide receiver, getting guys to step up. That Scatabo play, though, yeah, for sure. You put it perfectly, right? That could have been a moment that really turned the game. You turn the ball over there. This game probably feels a lot differently, but they were fortunate. Ball hit the turf. They scored a touchdown and kept the train rolling. You know, to the tune of 45-19 when all was said and done. Get on Arizona State, man. Kenny Dillingham, probably deservedly so in the conversation for Coach of the Year. Team that was picked to finish last in the Big 12 by the media that covers the Big 12. So good on them. What a turnaround of a season to go from there to there. First year in the Big 12, go and win the championship.
Yeah, I'm excited for Kenny Dillingham, being an ASU alum, to finish second in National Coach of the Year voting this year. It's going to be great.
Onward, Georgia, Texas.
Oof.
Yeah.
What is all right? Hang on. Before we even, this may be a question for after, but I'm going to ask you it now. Clemson and Texas are playing on the 21st of December. You have a saying, and I've kind of co-opted it. It's 7:13 p.m. on the East Coast, and Quinn Ewers is still not a great quarterback.
Yeah.
We go into this Clemson game. We watch them in the second half give up a 17-point lead to a mobile quarterback in Kevin Jennings. We saw on the TV broadcast that big-ass brace that Quinn Ewers is wearing around his ankle.
Yeah, the bionic leg.
He has not been the same since that injury about quarter of the way through the season. If you are Steve Sarkisian and you have Archie Manning sitting on that sideline, what's the percentage of plays that you are playing Archie Manning at quarterback compared to Quinn Ewers? Because I don't think they're going to start Archie Manning.
No.
But what's the percentage of plays that Archie, if you were the coach, would play?
I think you've got to find a way to get a package where he gets probably, I want to say, 10 to maybe 15 snaps. So you figure they're going to run 70-ish plays in a game. So we'll call it 15%, 20%, 20%. If I had to put a number on it, probably I would say if I were Sark, I'd find a way to get 20% for Arch, because I don't have to change my passing offense if I sub Arch in, right? This isn't Chris Leak, Tim Tebow. This is a little more mobile quarterback versus Quinn Ewers, who's more of a traditional kind of pocket drop back passer who can move a little bit, right? Like Arch is a guy who is supremely athletic, and we've seen it. I think you've got to get him in and you give him a couple of RPOs in the package. You give him a couple of design runs in the package and a couple of straight passes, and you try to keep the defense off, on their heels when he's in, because you mentioned it. The second half of that game, Jennings found his footing, and Clemson had no answer defensively for him. And truthfully, a better start by SMU, they might win that game by a couple scores. It just got away from them early. So Texas, being a team with more talent around a guy like Arch, I think you have to 20% probably. What do you think?
I was thinking 25. You said it. The passing game doesn't change a whole lot, and Archie is very clearly the more gifted runner with the ball in his hands. So if you want to include that aspect of the offense into your game, then you kind of got to go with him, right? And as anemic as their offenses look the second half of the season, I certainly expect them to try to mix things up a little bit.
I think there's a possibility too, because we've talked about it, right? Like defense isn't necessarily the problem for Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
We could potentially see a situation where the Texas offense is struggling and we get to halftime and Clemson's up by a score or two. We might see, because we've seen him bench Ewers earlier in the season, right? Game was out of hand against Georgia, but we know that Sark has that sort of ability to pull the leash. So we might see more of Arch than we really expect if they do struggle. I don't know that Clemson is going to be able to score that much on the Texas defense, but if they are up a score or two at halftime, we might see a little more Arch than Quinn in the second half, potentially.
Certainly. Well, go ahead.
Georgia, Texas, or did you have more?
No, I was going to say Georgia, Texas.
Yeah, Georgia, Texas. We talked about this going in, that Georgia dog walked Texas the first time. And for all intents and purposes, like there was a moment in this game where it felt like it could have teetered that direction. Now, it's 7:17 p.m. on the East Coast, and Carson Beck is still not a good quarterback. So we get a game where it goes back and forth, and we get down to it, and we're watching it actually at the stadium. We watched the conclusion of the game at the stadium, and we head to overtime, and it's like awesome, right? But then you think back, like we talked about it before we even left to head to the stadium. Like this was an ugly football game, mostly because like the two quarterbacks were just not good in this game. But we end up with overtime. Overtime football is great. Georgia ends up, knocking off Texas in overtime here. But overtime in a conference championship game, you kind of can't go wrong, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see any live.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just felt like to me watching that whole game, the Georgia-Texas game, it was a slog. Which typically, if I were to watch a game between two high-level teams and say that it was a slog offensively, I would give credit to the defenses, right? In this instance, I do agree that the defensive side of the ball for both Texas and Georgia is the better side of the ball than the offense is. But I didn't really think the defenses were dominating that game. I just thought the offenses were poor, Now, I'm sure there are nuances that someone like myself can't necessarily understand watching a game like that. I'm not a coach, right? Like I'm not Sark. I'm not the OC for fucking Georgia, whose name is escaping me. I'm really bad at these. But I'm not Kirby Smart but it looked to me from my perspective that the offenses were just struggling at various points throughout the game. Like neither of the quarterbacks looked very sharp. The running games didn't necessarily get rolling, right? You go to overtime and it's 16-16, and it's like it kind of was like who's going to have the ball. It's not even last. It's like who's on defense last. Who's going to win this game,
Yeah.
And then the Quinn Ewers injury obviously is and we can talk about this when we get to the bracket portion of the show, right? Because I know a lot of Florida State fans are upset about quarterback availability and the whole thing, but they won the game with their backup. Gunnar Stockton came in and he got his bell rung, and then Carson Beck had to come back in and he handed the ball off, and it's like Georgia still went out and won the game, and I get it. FSU did that as well, but like we don't know the full extent of the Carson Beck injury as of this moment. I don't expect him to play in the playoff game. It seemed pretty bad. If it like you don't hold your starting senior quarterback out of an SEC title game unless you absolutely have to, right? And that seems like a medical decision more so than a coaching decision, because Kirby Smart, if I know Kirby, he's going to tell his guy to get his ass back out on that field and win this game. And we've seen all year long that he has the utmost confidence in Carson Beck and his ability to sling the rock, despite what, you and I have said on the show. still has that confidence for some reason. But they went out and they did it with Gunnar Stockton. They get a bye, so they get like a month, basically 3.5 weeks, something like that, to prep and get Carson back up and on his feet. Again, I don't want to ruin our picks when we get to the brackets and such. Probably, I guess I don't think we'll pick them this week. We might pick a championship, but the actual games themselves, it gives me pause watching that offense in the second half, despite how good Gunnar looked on that very first drive at a halftime. Thinking, man, we're going into a playoff run with Gunnar Stockton at the helm. Gives me a little bit of, gives me some scary hour vibes.
Yeah. Mike Bobo.
Bobo, that's right. Yes,
I
Bobo.
always forget because Todd Monken was there so long.
Mm-hmm.
That name is always the first one that comes up, but he's with Baltimore now.
Yep.
And Mike Bobo is running the offense there for Georgia. But yeah, I'm with you. And I'll be honest, I don't expect Carson Beck to play another game this year. Looking at that, I'm not a doctor, and I know they haven't announced anything yet. But as a guy who's had surgery on both shoulders, I can attest to the fact that what I saw from him makes me think that there may be like rotator cuff of some sort on that right arm. And that when you take a shot like that, typically, like if it's on the wrist, I would think elbow, because that's the first kind of fulcrum in the arm that takes all of the stress of the blow. It was above the elbow. It was two hands. It was bad. And his arm was very much hangdog. And that, to me, I just think he's probably looking at a pretty serious soft tissue issue. If I had to put my chips on something, I would say probably rotator cuff, which is a pretty extensive rehab. It's not something you can just play through. It's very, very painful. It's very, very restrictive with the motion in that joint. It will like lock up and stop you from being able to rotate your shoulder the way that you would need to throw a football. So as it stands on December 11th, 2024, during the show, I don't think we see Carson Beck in the playoff. I think they're going to be spending the next 2.5 or 3.5 weeks preparing for Gunnar Stockton to run the show when they get to their quarterfinal game. So tough break. You've got your leader, you've got your quarterback. Our thoughts of him aside, that's still your guy. As you said, he still has trust in him. That locker room responds to him because he's been the guy in the huddle, in the trenches with you for 2 years now as the starting quarterback. But that's a tough thing to overcome. But I don't want to spoil too much about the bracket, but the field feels pretty open. Georgia could lean on a couple of different things and maybe find their way through to a semifinal or a final, and then all bets are off. If you're in the national championship game, all bets are kind of off. So we'll see. We'll see how Georgia responds. We'll see if Carson Beck is able to go or not. All right. Oregon, Penn State. Ho hum. I got burnt by Penn State again. I thought at one point, so this kind of got spoiled for us. We were going to try to watch this after the ACC championship game, and then scores kind of got divulged. But looking at it, I thought at one point Penn State might be able to close the gap on this thing at the end, and maybe it ends up on a field goal. Did not. Penn State, for all of the big game foibles of James Franklin, I thought, looking back on it and watching a replay of this and catching, the highlights and whatnot, like this didn't feel like your typical Penn State failure in a big game. They seemed to respond when they got down big early. Now, I don't know if that was a bit of Oregon pulling their foot off the gas, plus Penn State maybe responding a bit, but to get back in this thing and actually have a shot late down a score is maybe a win for a James Franklin coached team. But again, big game against a ranked opponent, number one team in the country. Penn State and James Franklin come up short yet again. I thought they would keep this tight. I did not have them winning. I thought it would come down to a kick It almost did, but it did not. And Oregon covers the 3.5.
Yes, I do. Just like I told you they would.
You did.
The game was
I was on
closer.
a roll too. I was 4-0 going into that damn game.
Yes, you were. Yes, you were. The Oregon defense is still susceptible.
Iffy.
They are better than they were in week 3, I think it was, when Ashton Jetty ran all over them, and they needed 2 special teams touchdowns to win that game. Tez Johnson finally was awoken from his slumber-ish. Yeah, he didn't have the amazing season that I think most of us expected him to coming into the year. But he had it when it mattered, right? This was his best game of the season. Obviously, the biggest stakes of the season. The Oregon defense is I said they're suspect. They give me I don't feel great about them. I know that they're talented. Their pass rush is not that good. Drew Aller, he was able to kind of do what he wanted to in the passing game. It was his best game of the season as well. I thought it may have not been statistically, but given the moment and the level of competition playing against, felt like he kind of had his I might leave now type moment. I will say, however, this was in a big game. This was probably the most impressed I was with James Franklin and his coaching staff. And I'm curious as to how much of it being at a neutral site has to do with that, right?
Yeah, fair.
Does the fanfare and the electricity in the stadium and the emotion of the moment, whether it's a big home or a big away game, is that something that gets to James Franklin and the guys, right? Because everybody knows guys feed off the coach, and if the coach is kind of swept up in the moment, is that something that can spill over onto the field? Well, here we see them come into a big game, number 1 team in the country, Big Ten championship game. It's at a neutral site. Now, granted, there's teams from both sides there, but you and I were at an ACC championship game and didn't have a dog in the fight, right? So how many of those people were there in Indianapolis? You know what I'm saying? Yep. So I don't. There may be nothing to it, and it may just be a random thought in my head, but it's maybe James Franklin just struggles.
Maybe he needs to petition for all of their top 25 matchups to be at neutral sites.
Yeah, I know you don't want to ride on the bus to get to the airport, but maybe it's good for you. You could use that time to decompress. I don't know.
Oh, man. I wonder how long the bus ride was from Happy Valley to Indianapolis. I got to guess 4 or 5 hours, probably 6 hours, maybe.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Drive time. Guessing based on kind of where my geography's terrible, but where I think Happy Valley is in Pennsylvania to where I think Indianapolis is in Indiana, maybe a 6-hour bus drive. But yeah, I don't know. Someone's probably going to correct me and tell me it's 11 and 10. Maybe they flew from the tiny airport.
It's possible. Well, the runway is not long enough, Gary. How could they possibly take off?
That's fair. But I'm with you. This was, I thought, looking back on it, I thought this was progress for a Penn State team and a coach that really does lay eggs routinely in these big games, these top 25 matchups. So maybe in 10 years, James Franklin will win one against the top 25 team. We'll see.
Good luck, bud.
Yeah. If they're going to win a playoff game, though, I guess they can check that one off, right?
They could win a playoff game, but not get a top 10 win.
Yes.
That's a possibility.
Yes. Yep. And then we finish up with Clemson against SMU. Clemson ends up winning this in just unbelievably dramatic fashion. And I'm gonna break this down for everybody listening, kind of how it went for us in the stadium. So Bentley's wearing his South Carolina shirt, taking a lot of flack from Clemson fans, and we happen to get tickets that were on the Clemson side. So we are fucking surrounded by Clemson fans, but we did have a couple of other SMU fans next to us. So it was interesting kind of conversation going back and forth. The first 3 quarters of this game, really the first half intensely, the Clemson fans were going in hard. They were feeling real good, giving Bentley a hard time. We're playing a playoff game and you're not, and blah, 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 blah. And Bentley just friendly reminder for every one of them routinely. 7 days ago,
Yes.
17-14, Carolina beat Clemson on the football field. And then you get to about the middle of the third quarter, and it seemed like SMU settled. Because for the whole first half, it was like they couldn't figure out how to manage maybe the weather, whether it was the environment, the moment. It was a big moment. ACC championship, a little different than the AAC championship, a little different than the Conference USA championship that they have been in. But something was just off. They weren't clicking. Kevin Jennings didn't look comfortable. The offense never really got it going. Nearly had a couple of turnovers early. They did have a fumble at one point, and it just seemed like the avalanche kind of fell on them. And Clemson fans were going nuts, and you and I kept looking at each other like, "Fuck, what the fuck is going on here? Are we gonna get this thing riled up or what?" And then SMU scores a touchdown right before the half. And I think that was kind of the beginning of things kind of settling down for them. Now we get to the third quarter, and it ends up it's a three full touchdown game. And SMU just starts to chip away. And it's a play here, it's a play there. They had a lot of drops in the first half that they didn't have in the second half. They made some plays. Kevin Jennings used his feet a lot. They were able to get this thing closed, and they had the ball with a little over 4 minutes left when they got the ball last. They go down the field and they score a touchdown in the far corner from us. And I shit you not when I say you could hear a fucking pin drop on the Clemson side of the field when they scored that touchdown. And there was only like 30 seconds, something like that, 35 seconds left when they scored the touchdown. It might have even been a little less than that. There was almost no time left.
16 seconds. 16.
Okay, so even fucking less. So they score this touchdown, and they go for one, and they tie it up and whatnot. And we're going to get fucking overtime football in the ACC championship. We're in the building for it. And then SMU pulls, I don't know if it was intentional or if the kicker literally just couldn't get it into or out of the back of the end zone, but he had seemed to be kicking touchbacks all night. On the final kickoff of the game, I don't know if Sean McDermott decided this play or what, but they should have consulted with him to remind them, like 13 seconds happened. They kicked the ball short of the end zone, and Clemson gets a huge return. And suddenly the energy's back on the Clemson sideline because they've got the ball at like the 43, I believe, yard line. And they're feeling like, maybe we can get a field goal, right? So they run a play, and they get to what did end up, a 54 or 55-yard field goal. So they get to the opposite side of the field, 37, I believe, is where they end up getting the ball to.
Yep.
On a prevent defense, and they've got timeouts. They call a timeout, and they bring out a freshman kicker. Now, old boy behind us called his fucking shot because he said this guy was a 5-star kicker. Now there's no 5-star kickers in the pipeline, but fine. He's a great freshman kicker, right? And I'll say all night he'd been kicking the ball way out of the back of the end zone. Clearly had a big leg, but 55 yards in it had to be what 30, 34, 33 degrees at that point. In the game when we were in the building. It was cold. It was cold, and you're kicking a brick. I'm thinking, no fucking way this dude's going to get it there. And he kicks a 55-yard field goal to win the ACC championship for Clemson. And the building goes nuts. Obviously, Clemson fans on that side of the building went bonkers. Now I want to get your thoughts. I laid all that out for everybody. Now I want to get your thoughts as the Gamecock fan that was in the house.
I'm trying to find exactly where it went, which possession it was, but it was late in the game. I believe it was in the fourth quarter. It may have been late in the third quarter. It was in the fourth quarter. The defining moment in this game to me, aside from the kicker, and he had been the SMU kicker, he had been kicking touchbacks all night. Aside from him, like, not kicking it deep in the end zone, which weird. I don't know. You give up a 61-yard kick return. Was the pass interference flag pickup where Clemson, like,
clear OPI.
Yeah, very clear OPI. it's a third down. They pass for the first down, and we're thinking, oh, man, we're going to get an offensive pass interference call. This is going to be backed up. It's going to be 3rd and 25. SMU's going to get the ball back, chance to go down, take the lead. And they huddle on the sideline, on our sideline, where the play happened, and they pick up the flag. And I'm like, what? Like, it made absolutely no sense to me.
It was such a clear OPI. Like, I yelled it in the middle of the play. Before the ball was even complete, I yelled OPI. Yep. I saw the flag come, and I was like, yep, that's coming back. And somehow, some way, they got huddled up and decided an offensive player beelining for a defensive back and wrapping his arms around him is not OPI.
Yeah, that to me, aside from the fumble in the first drive and then giving up 3 straight touchdowns on the first 3 possessions for Clemson, which I don't know if Clemson all season long scored three consecutive drives. But yeah, Jay, amazing game.
Citadel, I don't know.
Yeah, potentially. Jay asked what an amazing game. I agree. It was an incredible game to watch. Like, it was a lot of fun, especially being on the Clemson sideline, seeing the swing of emotions. Kevin Jennings is not Lenore Sellers. That is correct.
No, he's not.
Beating Clemson, it's not for everybody.
Not for everybody.
It's not for everybody. It certainly is for South Carolina and Lenore Sellers, but it's not for everybody. Similar to how going to Norman and winning is not for everybody, or going to Vanderbilt and winning is not for everybody. There's just things. There are things that are not for everyone in this world, except for Lenore Sellers, because that man can have it all. But no, in my opinion, the defining moment was picking up that OPI flag and allowing Clemson to continue that drive, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned it, settling down, SMU settling down. I do think early in the game that the weather probably played a factor, right? We're talking about a team who plays in Dallas. They're not necessarily – it's cold-ish there right now. It's not super cold yet, so they're not necessarily used to this weather. Now, unfortunately for them, they're going to have to go to Happy Valley and play in an even colder stadium. Yeah. But it's going to be a noon game there, so like maybe it'll be okay. I don't know.
Maybe the sun will be out.
Yeah. If you ask me, watching the first quarter of that game, they were just erratic and not ready, right? We know Dabo's been to this game like 9 years in a row or something. His boys, they were going to be prepared. They know what to expect coming in.
Yeah.
If you watch the second half of that game, I think it was fairly apparent who the more talented team was on the field.
Yep.
Right? We sat here and waxed poetically all season long about how awesome Kevin Jennings and that offense was, right? It was not, the first half at least, was not the SMU offense that we were used to seeing. Even that Duke game where they turned the ball over 6 times, they played better on offense in that game than they did in the first half of this one. They couldn't do anything. They were getting stuffed in the run. They were running these crazy jet sweeps, and they were getting stuffed in the backfield. Kevin Jennings, you mentioned the drops earlier. The number 1 receiver had 4 drops in that game, and then bobbled a punt. And it's like, man, they're erratic. They're all out of sorts. And then they come out of halftime and they chip away at a 17-point lead. They come back to tie it up. And then for some reason, they don't kick the ball out of the back of the end zone. They give up a 61-yard kickoff return. And then to your point, they play a prevent defense and let a guy run a little curl route and get it down to the 38-yard line. And we're like, man, those are mistakes. Those are game-losing mistakes, right? That's why they lost this game. It's because they made those dumb mistakes late in the game and put themselves in a position to lose. And I kept saying it to you, and I tried to tell our Clemson friends that Cade is going to throw one. He's going to throw a pick. He's going to throw a pick. And to his credit, he didn't. I really thought one was coming. They had one in the air that hit SMU's hands and got dropped in the second half. But my favorite part of the fan experience, aside from obviously telling them that 7 days ago South Carolina beat them in Clemson, was the guy who was sitting in front of us. We went into halftime. They're up 21-7. And he turns around and he goes, man, this is where our defensive coordinator makes his patented adjustments. And by adjustments, I mean he doesn't change anything, and then we come out and lose the game. And that's exactly what fucking happened.
It just about happened. Yeah.
That's exactly what happened, because SMU came out and they had clearly changed some things up on the offensive side of the ball. they had guys running open and actually catching passes, right? And Clemson's defense had no answer in the second half for what SMU was doing.
Nope.
And it was just very funny to see him say, hey, we're not going to make any adjustments. Came out, no adjustments. That was my favorite part of that experience.
Yeah, for sure.
The wrong team won. The wrong team won. That's what I'll say.
Wrong team won. All right. Well, let's transition to the college football bracket. So the college football playoff bracket is as follows. Oregon sits at 1, Big Ten champion, undefeated, rightfully so, sitting at 1. Georgia at 2, SEC champion, 2 losses, but every other conference champion either has 2 losses or plays in an inferior conference. Arizona State with 2 losses sits at 4. They'll take on Oregon. And then Boise State sits at 3. They will take on Georgia as the Mountain West champion. Going down the list, Texas hosts Clemson. Penn State, they host SMU. Notre Dame hosts Indiana. And Ohio State will host Tennessee in the first round. I want to first get your thoughts on. We've gone through the whole season and kind of talked about some of the changes with the CFP and how things are shaking out and whatnot. I want to get your thoughts on these games on campus in the first round. Are you for it? Against it? Do you think it's the right choice? Do you think it shouldn't be? Should they play a neutral site game? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I think it's great. What makes college football so magical to me, aside from what it used to be and that every game mattered, is the pageantry of it all, right? You get the home team, you get the home stadium, you get the home crowd, you get the band, you get the fight songs, you get the fireworks show, you have the social media team putting out their hype videos. Like, all of these things are what make college football so special in my eyes, right? The passion from the fan base. It's louder than any NFL game you go to. South Carolina caused a fucking earthquake in their state at one point this season when we beat Mizzou. Like, these are things that don't happen at NFL games, and these are things that do not happen at neutral site games, right? I mentioned James Franklin taking his team to Indianapolis and playing at a neutral site game where the emotions were not as high for the fans in the stadium because there were just less of them. And they played incredibly, right? Like, they played awesome on offense, at least. That's not going to be the case when they host SMU because they're going to have their entire stadium filled. They're going to do a whiteout, and it's going to be a raucous environment, and it's going to be a totally different atmosphere than what they saw in Indianapolis. And I think that's awesome, dude. It's truly, truly special when you get to play high pressure games on campus and you get the entire school out and everyone is there and everybody's tailgating and they're familiar with the territory. It's what makes college sports the best, right? College basketball has the same thing. Fog Allen, Cameron Indoor, the Dog Pound in Seattle where Gonzaga plays. Like, these are all storied places because of the passionate fan bases that pack into these stadiums every single weekend. And now we get to see it with the ultimate stakes, right? These are winner moves on, loser goes home. So I think it's incredible, personally.
Yeah, I agree. For all the reasons you said, right? The pageantry, what it means to play a home game in college football. The stadiums are bigger in terms of capacity, so they are louder than anything the NFL can provide. And a second reason why I like the fact that they're hosting in the first round is we've created more games in the CFP bracket. We know money, right? But we're not taking away bowl games from teams that would otherwise have played in these. Would you put it in a lesser bowl, that sort of thing? How would you spread it out? Would you change the dates of some of the bigger games? Because we're losing the New Year's Six bowls because they're going to be in rotation in the CFP for years forward, which they had been with the 4-team bracket, but we were kind of getting the teams that would have played those New Year's Six bowls games anyway. With this, it could be a rotation and whatnot, and we end up with maybe a Boise State playing in one that they maybe wouldn't have before, etc. But I I know we could have created more bowl games, but we don't need fucking more goddamn, Land O'Lakes spread with Spree Cream bowl. But I like that we're getting this. We can put them on campus. And I do think you're going to get a great environment for these games. It's going to be electric. It's going to feel like one of those kind of rivalry weekend games, I think, just because of the stakes. Like you said, these are the biggest stakes you can get in a home game like this late in the season. Winner goes on, loser goes home. So I like it. I want to kind of pose this to you too. So looking at the field, other than South Carolina, which we have professed over the last couple of weeks is one of the best 12 teams in the country, who's a team that on the outside you would put in, and who would you put them in for in the current field?
Am I allowed to say conference champions don't get an automatic bid?
Yes.
Oh, then get Clemson the fuck out of there. Get Clemson out of there. And if that's the case, you probably have to take SMU out. In which case, I would put. There was a kind of a 3-team race for that 11 spot, right? Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina. I understand my homerism was showing for most of the season. True serum, I think that Ole Miss probably deserves that spot over South Carolina. Just they have one fewer loss. They beat Georgia. They beat South Carolina head-to-head pretty handedly on the road. But if I'm able to take 2 out, if I'm able to take the ACC out, because they're just SMU doesn't have a top 25 win all season long, and they lost to Clemson. But then you tell me I'm allowed to remove conference champions. I would put Ole Miss and I put South Carolina in this field. You can put them at the bottom 2 spots if you want. That's fine. But I think that those are 2 of the 12 best teams in the country, looking at their roster, and especially looking at the way that South Carolina finished out the season. You can't convince me that South Carolina is not one of the 12 best teams. And I think that Ole Miss is deserving because of their wins over South Carolina on the road and Georgia at home. So, I think one is deserving, and I think one is one of the 12 best, right? So that would be the only adjustment that I would make, given the fact that conference champions do get the automatic buys, and the committee already said they're not going to penalize teams for playing and losing their conference championship game. I think that they got the 12-team field correct. However, we need to address the fact that they don't reseed after the field is set, right? The rankings don't matter, but the seeding, that's something that needs to be addressed.
Yep. Yeah. I'm with you. I think this field highlights 2 things. One, we've got to do away with I know they're already talking about going to 14. I think they eventually go to 16. I think we get to 16, and that ends up being the solution for the foreseeable future. I don't know how long the foreseeable future is, because 32 teams obviously get more playoff games. You're going to get more money, yada, yada, yada. I understand all that. But just from the perspective of the field, we've got to figure out how to do away with these conference champions just sitting at the top. Arizona State's not the 4th best team in the country. Boise State's not the 3rd best team in the country. Give me the 12-team field. If you want 5 conference champions in, whatever. Give me the 7 at-larges, but tell me who 1 through 12 are, and just seed them like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't like Boise State having a bye. I don't like Arizona State having a bye. No offense to either of those 2 teams. Also, selfishly, I'd like to see Boise State play on the blue turf one more time because it's fun to fucking watch. But I look at it from that perspective of these are not the 4 best teams in the country. They should not have a bye like that. And the other thing that this highlights is we've got to seed them 1 through 12. It's that simple. You can't. So the conference champions shouldn't get preference, and we've got to do a better job of seeding because, as you perfectly put it, the rankings don't fucking matter. So why are we even doing a ranking? If we're going to rank them, that's how they should be seeded. That's how they get seeded in the NCAA basketball tournament. That's how they get seeded in March. That's how they get seeded fucking everywhere else in competitive sports, except for college football. I understand this is the first year, but this is a learning opportunity that we did this wrong based on greed of the conferences, not wanting to get left out, not wanting to get hung high and dry with a road game or whatever the hell you want to call it. But we've got to fix it after this season going forward. If we're going to go to 14, whatever, but we've got to seed them 1 through 12, 1 through 14, 1 through 16, whatever it ends up being. We cannot give preference to conference champions because Arizona State's not the 4th best team in the country. Boise State's not the 3rd best team in the country. Neither of those teams should have a bye. Give me 2 byes from 2 teams behind them that are better teams and more deserving in terms of having those byes.
So I agree with the reseeding, right? Like just rank them 1 through 12. Top 4 seeds get byes. Everybody else has to play their games, right? Unfortunately, the committee, they ranked, I mean, you mentioned Boise State playing on the blue turf. They ranked Boise 9th, which means that they would have to play an away game.
I know. They would be away, yeah.
Boise State has 1 loss in the season. It's to the number 1 team in the country who just won the Big Ten. I'm okay giving them a bye. I have no problem with them getting a bye. You could tell me and I'm a huge proponent of the strength of schedule, but the committee has told us that strength of schedule does not matter.
Yeah.
That's what this committee has told us. Yeah. So given that parameter, why not just make Boise the 3rd best team in the country because they're undefeated outside of losing on the road to the number 1 team in the country, and they won their conference, and they have what, in my opinion and your opinion, should be the Heisman Trophy winner. Why not just make them the 3 seed, and that way it fits into they're one of the top 4 seeds, right? I agree. Arizona State, probably not one of the 4 best teams in the country. But, like, under this regime, they get the bye because they're the 4th highest ranked conference champion. And again, you said it, and I will reiterate, I'm okay if conference champions are automatic bids. That's fine. But you have to seed them accordingly. Clemson, who they have ranked as the 16th best team in the country, is the 12th seed in the playoff. So that's correct, right? Like they should be the last seed. But if Boise, who is ranked 9th in the country, is the 3 seed, that's incorrect. You just can't. That shouldn't work like that. And now you're looking at it and you get Texas, who the committee loves for some fucking reason. They're the 5 seed. They have to beat a Clemson, who's the 16th team in the country, according to the committee. And then they get to play Arizona State at a neutral site.
About a fucking cakewalk there for a Texas team.
Right? Like,
no disrespect to Arizona State, but
sure, but the committee is telling us that Texas is the 3rd best team in the country, and they have to beat number 16 and number 12 to make it to the semifinals.
Yeah.
Like, that's an insane thing to do. The biggest gripe of all of this that I have is that Oregon gets absolutely fucked.
Yeah, they've got to either play Tennessee, who can get you, or they've got to play Ohio State, who's the most talented team in the country.
Yeah, who they've already played
almost beat them on their home turf.
Exactly, right? Like, I'll tell you right now, we get to that game, it's Oregon, Ohio State. I'm taking Ohio State.
Yeah.
Like, Jeremiah Smith now has a full season under his belt to learn from his mistakes that he made. They're coming off of a bitter loss to Michigan. I'm taking Ohio State. I'll just say now, I'm taking Ohio State to win the national title.
I was going to ask you that in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I said that before the season. I almost waffled when I saw the bracket come out, and I just said, well, fuck it. Like, Penn State's going to win the whole thing because they have to beat SMU and then Boise State and then obviously Georgia, Indiana, and Notre Dame.
Georgia without their quarterback.
Yeah, it's like, but I can't pick Penn State. Like, that's kind of my brand here.
That is the wall that you occupy.
Yeah, and it's a pretty strong wall. I'll tell you one thing.
Wall.
Yeah. I don't love, like, Oregon got fucked, right? That's my biggest takeaway is Oregon got fucked. And it's because they don't reseed after they set the 12 teams.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree. So you're staying with Ohio State.
Yeah.
I'm with you, honestly. I'm going to hedge slightly. The winner of Tennessee, Ohio State, I have winning the national championship. I think I look at it. You mentioned it. Oregon's defense is they seem very vulnerable. The offense is kind of up and down, Jekyll and Hyde a little bit. Even in games, they can kind of be on highs and lows. I don't know that I trust them on a neutral site against against Ohio State, who nearly beat them on their turf. But Tennessee right now, who can run the ball well, and you mentioned it, Genty exposed that Oregon defense. I know that was a long time ago, but we just watched it this past weekend. Penn State moved the ball on them really well after a slow start. So give me the winner of Ohio State Tennessee as it stands right now to win potentially the national championship.
Yeah, I know that the Ashton Genty game was a long time ago, but Katron Allen just went for $124 on it.
Yep.
Like, it's not as though their defense has just been solidified after playing Ashton Genty, right?
Right.
They're still immensely talented. It's mostly in their secondary, but like that's a team that you can move the ball up and down the field on. And I think that probably Ohio State would give them the most issues on defense of all the, maybe Texas, like of all the teams I'm looking at in this field. Like those are probably the two best defenses in my opinion, Ohio State and Texas.
I don't know that the Texas offense really scares anybody right now.
No.
Unless you told me Sark was going to give Arch a significant portion of games, I don't know that Texas offense really threatens anybody right now, unfortunately.
No, I agree.
All right, well, let's shift gears to this coming weekend. We've got an isolated game, Army-Navy, the 125th edition of the Army-Navy football game. It's happening here in the D.C. area. Army is favored by 6.5. Those Navy uniforms, though, they are so clean.
Yep.
The Jolly Rogers, as they call them. I was going to try to get a picture of the gloves, too, but you can see the skull and crossbones on the helmets. The gloves they'll be wearing this weekend as the players kind of interlock their hands and have those logos now. They've got the Jolly Roger on the gloves, too. It's pretty slick. So really cool, really clean uniforms this weekend. Army's is nice. It's just not Navy's for this weekend. Army's had some really nice ones in the past, but this one's kind of plain and straightforward, but it's pretty clean. But Army's favored by a touchdown, 6.5. You and I are in agreement. Army's going to win this by 6.5, or we're going to lay the 6.5 for Army. Talk to me about why though. Why are you laying the points with Army?
So I've just looked at the teams down the stretch, right? We were very high on the Navy offense, really up until like the Notre Dame weekend, and then kind of they knocked the train off the tracks, right? The efficiency went down. They got steamrolled by a Tulane team, 35-0, who then turned around and lost to the same Army team that's going to be playing this weekend.
Yeah.
So I could Navy win this game? Probably. Do they have the talent? Sure. Yeah. But like, I'm looking at the way that the teams are playing at this exact moment, something that the College Football Playoff Committee has no idea how to do. But if I take into account recent weeks and recent production for both sides of these programs,
how a team is playing right now.
Yeah. Imagine that. Weird. I just have to go with Army on this one. I think Army's better. They've been better all season long. Was it 14.5, almost 15-minute drive against North Texas. If they're able to do that, the 11-minute drive against Tulane, if they can knock out a couple of those, like this is going to be a fast game. It's going to be like 2.5 hours long.
Yeah. They might not be able to get enough commercials in.
Yeah, right. They'll get in, they'll get out. I think Army wins by like 2 scores probably.
Yeah, it hurts. Yeah, it hurts me to say that. Army probably by 14. I will still be chanting "Go on Navy, beat Army" though. But reality speaking, if I'm laying a ticket, Army just their offense is so efficient. Navy, I think it's interesting because they're still kind of in this transition away from what Niumatalolo ran and what maybe Niumatalolo wanted to run. Because as we've seen, he's out in San Jose State and they run a fucking air raid, complete opposite of the triple option that they ran at Navy. Navy's implemented some of the hybrid concepts into the offense. Army, we've seen a little bit too. They've got a quarterback that can stretch the field when they need him to. But I just think Army's offense, from an efficiency standpoint, is better. And for that, this could be a 2.5 hour, 28-14 win by Army. And we could see a a game that just fucking you blink and you miss it because they just keep the clock running.
Yep.
The style of football that these two teams play. I wouldn't be surprised though. Like you said, could Navy win this game? Yeah, they could because of the familiarity. It's a rivalry. You see a lot of weird things on rivalry weekend. Looking at you, Auburn returning a 109-yard missed field goal against Alabama in the Iron Bowl. So yeah, certainly Navy could win this thing, but I just think from an offensive efficiency perspective, Army's got the leg up in this game. All right, bud. Well, that brings us to a conclusion here this week. Next week, we're going to start making some picks in the CFP bracket. We'll probably each fill one out. So we'll give everybody our picks going forward. And then we reserve the right each week to revise our bracket and then make more picks so that everybody can see those picks with new information available. But we'll have a preview for the college football playoff, and we'll have more bowl games to preview. There are a couple of kind of small time bowls this weekend during Army-Navy weekend, but Army-Navy is obviously the big game of the weekend, so we highlighted that. But next week we start bowl season, and the college football playoff is on the horizon. Any closing thoughts, bud?
Yeah, I have one for you. We are fans of the overs on this show.
Yep.
We like points. We like big points. And we kind of have a rule around here. Any total that opens up in like this 65 and over range, it's just an auto bet. You put the ticket in when you see it. We have a 68.5 point total for North Texas, whose quarterback, I believe, finished second in the country in passing yards this season. He was top 5 going into the final week of the season. I didn't see the final standings. And then we have Texas State, the Bobcats on the other side, who are one of the highest scoring teams in the country, and they have been all year long. I have cashed a lot of tickets on the over for their games. They're opening up at 68.5, Gary. 68.5. I mean, it's just an auto bet. You take the over there.
Yeah.
You just
hey, listen, we got a few weeks for that thing to get into the 70s too.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Yeah, that should be a fun game. Both teams, a lot of offense, not a lot of defense. Should be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited for that one.
Yeah, for sure. All right, bud. Well, good episode for Bentley and everybody here at Backyard Sports. This has been Tailgate Trash Talk, brought to you by Backyard Sports. We